"What's a farm boy like you doing in my army?" The words cracked like a whip across the barracks and everyone froze. Private Hayes stood at attention, boots polished but trembling, as Drill Sergeant Miller's voice echoed off the cinder block walls. Laughter rolled through the platoon, low at first, then louder. "Hayes, you sure you're old enough to shave? Or did the recruiter just feel sorry for you?" Another round of chuckles. He wanted to disappear, but there was no hiding in the army. Every eye was on him, waiting for him to break. That was his welcome to Fort Braddock. A row of steel bunks, the sharp smell of disinfectant, boots lined like soldiers ready for inspection. Hayes wasn't built like the others. He was lean, wiry, with hands calloused from hauling hay back home, not from lifting iron in a gym. He carried the sound of the Midwest in his voice, soft, unsure, with no city edge. To the others, he looked more like a kid who should be bagging groceries than wearing combat boots, and they didn't let him forget it. That night, he fumbled his footlocker during inspection. The latch stuck, then snapped open too fast, spilling his folded shirts across the floor. "Outstanding, Hayes," Miller barked, his tone dripping sarcasm. "Maybe if the enemy attacks with laundry, you'll be a hero." The room erupted. Hayes bent down, hands shaking, folding faster, tighter, trying to recover. Across the row, Private Blake smirked, nudged the guy beside him, and mouthed the word, "pathetic." Hayes saw it, swallowed hard, and kept folding. In chow hall, it got worse. The line moved fast, trays clattering, boots stomping. Hayes hesitated, scanning the choices, and bumped into the man ahead of him. A ladle of gravy splashed onto his sleeve. Blake, 2 soldiers back, seized the moment. "Careful, Hayes. That uniform's the only thing making you look like a soldier." The laughter was louder this time, bolder. Hayes said nothing, just sat alone with his tray, eating quickly, head down. A biscuit rolled across the table. Blake had tossed it, grinning. Hayes didn't react. He just took another bite. But not everyone was laughing. Corporal Johnson, older, quiet, his uniform worn from deployments overseas, sat at the far table. He watched Hayes not with pity, but with a kind of curiosity. Johnson had seen this game before, the pack picking out the weakest. He didn't speak, didn't intervene. In the army, silence was its own code. But in the way Johnson's eyes lingered, there was something Hayes noticed but didn't dare acknowledge. Back in the barracks under dim lights and the hum of ceiling fans, Hayes opened a small spiral notebook. While others joked and wrestled or drifted off, he scribbled diagrams, radio schematics, notes on knots, maps. It wasn't much, just what he remembered from manuals and farm repairs back home. His handwriting was cramped, his focus intense. He didn't see Johnson watching from his bunk, arms folded, saying nothing. The days blurred, push-ups in the mud, marching under heavy packs. Miller's voice tearing into him at every stumble. Hayes wasn't fast. He wasn't the strongest. And the more the platoon saw him fail, the more they fed on it. A dropped rifle and drill earned him the nickname Butterfingers. A missed cadence during run brought a chorus of mocking echoes. Blake thrived on it, always the loudest voice in the crowd. And yet, Hayes never lashed back. He didn't curse. He didn't throw a punch. He just absorbed it all, like sandbags soaking up the rain. The humiliation cut deep, every insult a reminder that he didn't belong. But inside, he carried something the others couldn't see, a stubborn refusal to quit. Each night after lights out, when the barracks fell quiet, he did push-ups alone. When the rain came down during marches, he leaned into it, step by step, no matter how raw his feet felt. Miller didn't notice or pretended not to. To him, Hayes was an example of weakness, someone to grind into the dirt to harden the rest. Blake didn't notice either. He was too busy laughing, too sure the farm boy would wash out. Only Johnson noticed, silent, steady, waiting. And maybe that's why, when Hayes's hands shook under the weight of his duffel one night, when he nearly buckled under the load, Johnson's voice finally broke the silence. "Keep your back straight," he muttered, low enough only Hayes could hear. "You'll carry more than this one day." Hayes glanced up, surprised, but Johnson was already looking away, like nothing had happened. "I thought that was the end of it. Just another rough day, another insult swallowed, another bruise no one saw. But I was wrong. That night, as Hayes scribbled again in his notebook, the sound of Blake's laughter from the other side of the room rang louder, sharper, like a warning. Something was building, though none of them could see it yet. What I never expected was that the boy they mocked in canvas boots and a trembling voice would one day be the one to silence them all. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The rain came down hard that morning, drumming on helmets and ponchos like a steady war drum. The platoon was pushing through a 6-mile ruck march, packs digging into shoulders, boots sloshing through the mud. Hayes lagged near the back, his frame straining under the 60 pounds strapped to him. His face was pale, lips pressed tight, but his eyes stayed forward. Every step looked like it might be his last, and the others noticed. "Don't drop out now, farm boy," Blake sneered from 2 rows up. "The cows won't wait for you back home." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel enough to stop the rain, but it was sharp enough to cut through it. Hayes didn't answer. He just leaned forward, pushed one step, then another, boots sucking into the mud like quicksand. By the time they reached the ridgeline, everyone was soaked, shivering, cursing under their breath. Miller barked the order to drop packs and form up. Hayes fumbled with his straps, fingers stiff from the cold, while the rest unbuckled with practiced ease. Blake, smug as always, leaned close and whispered, "Maybe we'll pin a medal on you for surviving a walk." Hayes met his eyes just for a second, jaw tight, then looked away. He wasn't going to give Blake what he wanted. He should have felt shame. But what burned inside was something quieter, stubborn, heavy. He would finish every step, no matter how much it hurt. Later at the range, the sun burned away the rain, but the humiliation kept coming. They lined up, rifles locked and loaded. Hayes's hands trembled as he aimed, shots scattering wide across the target. Blake laughed loud enough for the others to hear. "Cover's safe with you around. You couldn't hit a barn if you were standing in it." Miller didn't laugh, but he didn't defend Hayes either. He walked past and shook his head. "Pathetic," he muttered, just loud enough. Hayes lowered his weapon, shoulders sagging, ready for another round of ridicule, then quietly from just behind him. "Thumb here. Grip it firm, but don't fight the weapon." It was Johnson, his voice low, eyes forward, as if he hadn't said a thing. Hayes adjusted, squeezed again. This time the shot found steel. A small ping echoed, sharp and pure. Nobody else seemed to notice, but Hayes did, and maybe Johnson knew he did too. In Chow Hall that evening, Hayes sat alone, tray balanced, eating fast and quiet. The din of voices filled the room, forks clattering, boots scuffing against tile. Blake and his crew sat 2 tables over, talking loud enough to carry. "He's dead weight. You put that kid in a fight, and he's done in the first 5 minutes. Another soldier laughed. "He's done in the first 5 seconds. They all snickered, tossing scraps of bread across the table, like kids in a cafeteria. One roll skidded across to Hayes' tray. He didn't look up, didn't flinch, just kept eating. That silence, that refusal to fight back, almost enraged Blake more than a punch would have. When lights went out, most of the platoon crashed, exhausted. Hayes stayed awake. He pulled out that same battered notebook, scribbling diagrams under the faint glow of a flashlight, shielded by his blanket. Radio wiring, sketches of weapon parts, notes on knots and survival tricks he'd memorized. His handwriting was cramped, precise. Every page filled with work nobody had asked him to do, nobody cared about. He whispered cadence under his breath, timing his push-ups with each line. Sweat soaked through his shirt, dripping onto the pages. He wasn't training for anyone else. He was training because he refused to be the weak link. Across the room, Johnson rolled on his bunk, eyes half open, watching silently. There was no smile, no nod, just recognition. The next day, the platoon drilled in formation. Sun high, packs heavier, sweat pouring down backs. Hayes pushed hard, lungs burning, legs screaming. Blake jogged beside him, whispering just loud enough. "Drop out. Do us all a favor. Nobody wants you here." Hayes clenched his jaw, said nothing, but his pace quickened. He ran harder, every insult adding fuel to the fire inside. When they finally halted, Miller stormed past, face red with fury. Pathetic performance. You want to disgrace my platoon, Hayes? The words were aimed to break him. Instead, Hayes just snapped his salute, steady despite his shaking body. For the first time, Miller's anger faltered. The roller coaster never stopped. One night during gear inspection, Blake snuck over, yanked one of Hayes's boots, and tossed it under a bunk. When Miller demanded accountability, Hayes stood there silent, admitting fault without excuse. Can't even keep track of your boots? Miller shouted. The platoon snickered, but Johnson's eyes narrowed, catching Blake's smirk. He said nothing, but the balance had shifted. Hayes took the punishment, extra drills until his arms shook, but never once pointed a finger. That silence, that unwillingness to drag someone else down, spoke louder than anything. The climax came during a night exercise. They were tasked with assembling field radios in blackout conditions, only red lamps flickering in the dark. Hayes sat cross-legged, hands moving fast, mind clicking into place. Around him, soldiers cursed, fumbling with wires, dropping pieces into the dirt. Miller barked, 10 minutes! Sweat ran down brows, tempers flared. Blake's voice hissed through the dark. Bet Hayes screws this for all of us? But then something shifted. Hayes's radio clicked, static flaring, then a voice came through clear. Alpha, this is command. Copy? He'd done it. First one finished, flawless. The silence that followed was heavy, almost painful. Every head turned toward him, eyes wide. Blake muttered, lucky break. But the look in Johnson's eyes told another story. Respect. Quiet. Steady. Earned. Miller stood there too long, face unreadable, before growling, about time you pulled your weight. But everyone knew what had just happened. Hayes wasn't the joke anymore. He was the one who had carried them through when it mattered. That night in the barracks, the mocking was quieter. Blake still muttered, but there was no laughter to back him up. Johnson walked past Hayes's bunk, paused just long enough to tap the notebook at his side. Keep at it, he said, voice low. It'll pay off. Hayes looked up, surprised, but Johnson was already gone. It wasn't redemption yet, not fully. Hayes still carried the weight of every insult, every humiliation. But something had shifted. The tide was turning. The kid they thought would break had begun to bend steel. And what none of them knew was that soon, when the real test came, Hayes would be the one they'd all be praying to follow. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The night air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your uniform and made every breath feel heavy. The platoon stood in formation, packs lined, rifles checked, waiting for orders. It wasn't just another drill. This was the big one, the simulated night raid on the mock village, the test that separated the ones who could handle combat from the ones who couldn't. Sergeant Miller made sure they all knew. This isn't a stroll through the park, he barked, pacing like a wolf. Tonight you either prove you belong in this army or you pack your bags. No excuses. His eyes landed on Hayes and the sneer came quick. Some of you better start packing now. The laughter that followed hit like a slap. Blake grinned wide, leaning toward the others. Guess we all know who he's talking about. Hayes stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight, jaw clenched. He wasn't going to crack. Not tonight. They loaded up in the trucks, bouncing down the dirt road in silence, the only sound the rattle of gear and the hum of engines. Hayes sat near the back, clutching the radio strapped to his chest. They'd given him that job, not because he was trusted, but because it was supposed to be the safest. Carry the comms, repeat what others said. Don't get in the way. Even Blake smirked as he passed, whispering, just don't drop it, hero. Hayes said nothing. He gripped the straps tighter. When they dismounted, the village loomed ahead, lit only by the moon and a few flickering lamps. The air was quiet, too quiet. Miller gave the signal. Squads fanned out, rifles raised, boots crunching in gravel. Hayes followed close behind, the radio heavy on his chest. His heart pounded so loud he thought the others might hear it. But he kept moving, step by step. The first problem hit fast. Static cracked through the headset. The comms went down. Miller cursed, slapped the side of his own radio. "Hayes, get this damn thing working, now!" Panic rippled through the squad. They were blind without command, deaf without orders. Blake's voice cut through the tension. "Knew this would happen. Should have given the radio to someone who knew what they were doing." Snickers followed. Hayes knelt, flipped open the panel, and his hands started moving. Wires, switches, dials. Nothing looked right. The rain earlier had soaked half the gear, corrosion biting at the connectors. He could feel every eye burning into his back, waiting for him to fail. He remembered the nights under his blanket, scribbling diagrams in that old notebook. Remembered the hours fixing broken farm equipment with nothing but duct tape and determination. His hands moved steady, stripping a wire with his teeth, twisting connections, rerouting circuits. Static turned to silence, then a faint hum, then a clear voice crackled through. "Alpha, this is command. Do you copy?" Hayes keyed the mic, voice steady. "Alpha copies." Relief washed through the squad like a wave. For a moment, just a moment, the doubt quieted. But then the chaos started. A simulated explosion rocked the far side of the village. Smoke poured out. Shouts filled the night. Blake froze mid-step, wide-eyed. Another soldier stumbled, falling back. Miller roared for order, but in the dark it was every man for himself. That's when the scream cut through. Blake was down, trapped under collapsed debris from a makeshift wall. His leg pinned, face pale, gasping. "Help me! Somebody! Please!" The others hesitated, fear locking them in place. Miller cursed again, looking around. No one moved. No one except Hayes. He dropped the radio, sprinted toward the rubble. "Get off me!" Blake shouted, half panicked, half shamed. "You'll screw this up too." Hayes ignored him, bracing against the debris, shoving with every ounce of strength in his wiry frame. It didn't budge. He shifted, studied the angle, then grabbed a metal beam, wedging it under like a lever. His arms shook, muscles screaming, sweat pouring down his face. "Push when I say," he growled, voice low, steady. Blake stared, then nodded weakly. Hayes heaved, the beam creaking, the rubble lifting inch by inch. Blake dragged his leg free, rolling out just as the debris crashed back down. Hayes collapsed to his knees, gasping, but he was smiling, not because he wanted thanks, but because he hadn't quit. The silence that followed was deafening. No one laughed. No one mocked. Johnson stepped forward first, eyes locked on Hayes, giving the smallest of nods. Respect. Blake sat up, face red, shame written all over him. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Miller looked around, jaw tight, expression unreadable. Finally, he barked, "Platoon, move out!" His voice was hard but different. No ridicule, no sneer. They finished the raid with Hayes carrying the radio, steady as ever, his eyes sharp, his steps sure. The platoon moved tighter, closer, the mocking gone, replaced with something else. Not yet praise, not yet open respect. But the first cracks in the wall of doubt had formed. Back at the trucks, Miller called for silence. The squad stood in the mud, exhausted, covered in grime, waiting for the storm they expected. But it didn't come. Miller's gaze fell on Hayes. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then finally he spoke. "Private Hayes, tonight you did what soldiers are supposed to do. You kept your head when everyone else lost theirs." He paused, voice lower now. "That's the only reason we finished this mission." The words landed heavy, cutting through the night. Nobody moved. Nobody dared laugh. In the barracks later, Blake limped to his bunk, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't meet Hayes's gaze, didn't offer a word. The silence between them was louder than any insult. Johnson passed by, stopping at Hayes's bed. He didn't say much, just tapped the radio lying beside him. "You did good," he said, simple as that. Then he walked away. Hayes lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow above. His body ached, his hands were raw, but for the first time since he arrived, the pain didn't matter. Something had changed. The platoon saw him differently now, not as dead weight, not as the weak link, but as the man who had stepped up when no one else would. And deep down, Hayes knew this was only the beginning, because if tonight proved anything, It was that when the real fight came, he wouldn't just survive it, he'd lead through it. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The barracks felt different the morning after the raid. Not louder, not quieter, just different. The usual chorus of jokes and mocking remarks that normally greeted Hayes had vanished. Blake, who was always first to throw a jab, sat at the edge of his bunk, lacing his boots in silence, his head down. For the first time, Hayes walked past without hearing the word farm boy. Nobody laughed. Nobody said a thing. That silence weighed heavier than the insults ever had. In the chow hall, the change was clearer. Hayes walked in, tray in hand, expecting the usual empty seat at the far corner. But the whispers stopped when he stepped through the door. The table where Blake and his group sat was strangely still. Nobody threw bread this time. Nobody muttered. He sat alone out of habit, but it didn't feel the same. Soldiers glanced his way, not with scorn, but with something closer to curiosity, or maybe respect. Hayes ate slowly, unsure what to do with this sudden shift. For weeks, silence had meant rejection. Now it felt like space being made for him. The real moment came during morning formation. The platoon stood stiff, boots aligned, rifles in hand. Sergeant Miller paced like always, eyes sharp, voice cutting through the crisp air. He barked orders, checked uniforms, stopped in front of Hayes. Everyone held their breath. This was usually the moment where Miller drove the knife in. Instead, Miller stopped dead, stared at him, then raised his voice so the whole platoon could hear. Private Hayes, the name echoed. Hayes snapped to attention, heart pounding. Miller's voice was hard but steady. Last night, when others froze, you acted. When others panicked, you carried this platoon. His words hung heavy. Nobody moved. Nobody dared breathe. Miller turned to the rest. That's what a soldier looks like. It was like a lightning strike. Every head turned, eyes wide, as if they couldn't believe what they'd heard. Miller had built his reputation tearing Hayes down, and now he had flipped it in front of everyone. Hayes kept his face straight, discipline holding him steady, but inside it was like the ground had shifted. For the first time, the weight he'd carried wasn't just his alone. After formation, Johnson walked up, his calm presence steady as always. He didn't smile, didn't raise his voice, just placed a firm hand on Hayes' shoulder. Respect's not given, he said, voice low, only for Hayes to hear. It's earned. You earned it last night. Then he walked off, as if nothing had happened. But that small gesture carried more weight than any medal. Blake's shame was written across his face the rest of the day. He limped through drills, eyes locked on the ground, voice absent from the chatter. At one point in the chow hall, he tried to speak, words catching in his throat. Hayes, But he couldn't finish. Instead, he just slid his tray down the line and sat at the far end, alone. The mocking he once led had left him behind. That night, under dim barracks lights, Hayes sat on his bunk, notebook in hand. He wasn't hiding it anymore. He wrote openly, diagrams and notes spilling across the pages. For weeks, that notebook had been a secret, a place where he built himself in silence. Now soldiers glanced at it with curiosity, whispering, not mocking. One leaned over and asked, "What's that?" Hayes looked up, thought about hiding it, then just said quietly, "It's how I keep sharp." No laughter followed, only nods. The roller coaster wasn't all pride. There was tension too. Some weren't ready to accept the shift. Hayes overheard one soldier mutter to another, "He got lucky, doesn't mean he belongs." Those words stung, but less than they once did, because now Hayes had proof, not for them, but for himself. He'd carried a man out from under rubble. He'd restored, calms under pressure. He'd stood when others froze. That truth couldn't be erased. The climax of this new reality came at the end of the week. Drill Sergeant Miller assembled the platoon on the field, his voice sharper than usual. "This army doesn't care where you're from," he shouted, pacing.